Last week, fire tore through parts of Fort McMurray, Alberta. It triggered the largest evacuation in Canadian history, displacing nearly 90,000 of Canada's hardest working people. The fire claimed about 2,400 structures in Fort Mac, including the homes of the leader of the official opposition, Wildrose MLA for Fort McMurray-Conklin, Brian Jean, and the home of unofficial oil sands ambassador Robbie Picard. Firefighters heroically fought to save houses and vital infrastructure in Fort Mac, and it looks like they've really performed a miracle. Reports say up to 90% of the city was saved, including the downtown. We all owe these firefighters such a huge thanks for their exhaustive efforts. They kept 90% of the city of Fort Mac safe from a fire that was 204,000 hectares in size. This past week, we've seen an outpouring of support for Fort Mac. Donations have flooded into the Red Cross, local charities, and evacuee centers. Seeing the response of everyday Albertans to this tragedy makes me proud to be an Albertan. Prouder, I should say. This could be the most expensive disaster in Canadian history. It's serious, serious stuff. Times like this are when good leadership floats to the top. And we're seeing that sort of leadership from Fort Mac Fire Chief Darby Allen and from Brian Jean, who stayed in and around Fort Mac to help where he could, even though his house and everything he owned was taken from him in the fire. Brian Jean and fellow Wildrose MLA for Fort Mac Wood Buffalo, Tanny Yao, both refused to take beds meant for evacuees, even though they were just as much evacuees as the next person from Fort McMurray. This is a tweet from Brian Jean's press secretary, Vitor Marciano, showing Jean and Yao's camping setup in Anzac, south of Fort Mac. Now remember when I talked about good leadership floating to the top? Well, in times like this, bad leaders sink right to the bottom. This is an Edmonton online message board, and one of the posters says something interesting and infuriating. One of the posters says that Rachel Notley and her caucus were out celebrating their one-year anniversary since being elected in an Edmonton bar called the Red Star on May 5th. May 5th was the day that the extent of the damage in Fort Mac was becoming shockingly evident to all of us. The fire swept into town on the 3rd. There was no way, right? There's just no way that Rachel Notley and her caucus could possibly be that tone deaf. They're inept. I certainly don't like the job they're doing, but they can't be that out of touch to be out partying, could they? Well, they are that tone deaf. I went to the Red Star Twitter page and saw this tweet thanking Rachel Notley for celebrating her 1 year in office at their bar. So it is true. As Fort Mac burned, as Brian Jean and Tanny Yao slept in a tent and gave others the evacuee beds meant for them, as every day Albertans found ways to help each other in our darkest hours by taking in evacuees and delivering food and fuel to strangers on the side of the road. The Premier was out celebrating. Worse yet, Notley was celebrating in public in a bar in downtown Edmonton. This wasn't behind closed doors, not in a private reception with her caucus. No, this was in our faces. It was right out in the open. It's so brazen and so shameless. And being as out of touch as she is, Rachel Notley didn't think this would be something that would bother us. Well, it bothers me. Bothers me a whole lot. It bothers me that the Premier and her caucus couldn't set aside their selfish celebration of their own accidental victory. They felt entitled to it, entitled to their little party. This is Premier Notley saying, let them eat cake, while Albertans sleep in cots with only the clothes on their backs. For the Rebel.media, I'm Sheila Gunn Reid.
Thanks for watching. Click here to never miss a Rebel update. Want even more of the Rebel? Well, click here to become a premium member.